Hello, and welcome to Circulating Conversations, the podcast where we discuss library topics, genre deep dives, and book recommendations. I'm your host, Rachel, an Adult Services Librarian, and I have with me my guest,
Robert. I'm also an Adult Services Librarian.
And today on Circulating Conversations, we're going to be talking about book-to-movie adaptations. So in honor of J.R.R. Tolkien's birthday month, we're going to be talking about the adaptations of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. How they may differ between book to movie, what are the pros and cons of adapting a book, and whether just in general we think they're a good piece of media or not. So I want to say welcome back to Robert because
it's great to be back.
Yes, because you may recognize his voice from the very first episode of Circulating Conversations.
We talked about ChatGPT and AI and such, but I'm definitely more excited to be here for this topic on Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, particularly the movies and the books, as I am a huge fan.
Yes, which is exactly why I asked you to be here. So I feel like we're going to have a good discussion today. So I figured we can start with The Lord of the Rings, since that is the first adaptation to have come out. Sure.
We're talking about the books. I mean, they're over 70 years old at this point. And, you know, they are the book of fantasy literature, particularly just the book in the 20th century. You'll find very few things that can actually top it in terms of, you know, whether you're talking about charts or popularity. I kind of only discovered it right when those movies came out 20 years ago. And there's a reason why they have held such a stranglehold on, fantasy, fandom, I should say, in today's society. The books are fantastic. And then, in turn, the movies are fantastic. I will say this. So I'm coming into this not having read the books. Okay. They're long and they're a bit flowery. I do want to read them, but I think I need to be in the right mindset to read them. And I've tried, but I've stopped. So I'll get to it eventually. Yeah, that's definitely a common criticism for people, even book readers themselves. Just the style with the books themselves. Particularly with Tolkien, what's most impressive about him is not necessarily that he just, wrote a story, it's a great story, is he created an entire universe. Yes. And, he kind of set that standard on, world building for, fiction, that, he created this world and then he wrote a story in the world. And you mentioned how, the writing is very flowery. That's a unique word to say because the greatest character in his book is the setting itself. And he'll spend a lot of big criticism is he'll spend 2 pages I should say talking about trees. Yes. And I think that's what I remember about it. I'm like, I got to get past this. I made it through the first chapter and then I was like, momentum slowed. But I have seen the movies multiple times and I definitely love the movies. And that's where, and I'm actually like that a lot with book to movie adaptations. I tend to see the movies first and then that gives me the inspiration to want to read the books. Yeah, I'm the same exact way. Movies are just an easier medium to consume. Yeah. And it's kind of, always right up in your face in terms of what it's presented to you. And it's like, oh, okay, I'll go see that. And then you find out it's based on a book, whether it's faithful, whether it's worse, whether it's better, that's, you determine after the fact. But I do find that I do that myself is I'll see a movie, watch a TV show, find out it's a book series first and then, or, it's a book first and I'll go and read it if I'm really into it. So, and one of the things I like about that too is because I think what interests me about that is then you can see the similarities and differences. And I think that's an interesting point. I just like seeing that, like, oh, this is what they changed. What did I like better? So let's get into that. What do you think are the pros for the book to movie adaptation for Lord of the Rings? With Lord of the Rings, the books itself are massive. There is a lot of stuff that went into the books that did not make it to the movies. And they even added stuff in the movies, that took its place. Right. I do think that it did require paring down. So a big positive for, that translation is
Peter Jackson, who created the movies, was able to definitely kind of, cut out certain things that wouldn't necessarily translate well into a movie compared to a book. And one of the big things that people talk about is you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it.
Right.
In the books is like a lot of chapters focused around singing and songs and lyrics, which is very prevalent in the kind of literature that Tolkien was trying to portray with Lord of the Rings in that kind of medieval epic kind of situation. There's a lot of singing, a lot of songs. People just kind of burst out into it. In a movie, it would, unless it's a literal musical, it really would not translate well, and it would definitely turn people off of it. So that's one of the big things that didn't make it into the movies that I think was a good positive. And then you'll find people who say the opposite, that they wish it was in there. But just from what it is as is now, I think it was a good decision.
Yeah. And slipping in The Hobbit slightly, when they did go to that, they did kind of incorporate a little bit of that when they decided to adapt that.
Yes, specifically like in the beginning,
Yes.
in one of the opening scenes at the dinner scene, The Hobbit does have a lot of songs and singing and such, and that was actually really artistically done well. Whether it was a silly kind of shanty song of them just like washing dishes and stuff, or like the serious somber of like the Misty Mountains. It just hit themes home perfectly that it translated from the book, which is more juvenile compared to the Lord of the Rings.
Right.
So I think it made perfect sense to have those in there. The other criticisms withstanding.
So on Lord of the Rings, so I read a lot because since I didn't read the books, I was kind of just reading about the differences and changes and stuff. So I saw some like character changes, like in terms of personality of some big key characters like Gandalf and Aragorn. And do you feel like those changes helped those characters? Do you think they're good either way in both renditions?
It's a really good point. Because people will say I prefer this or that. I think for most of them, that where you can find divergence between how someone is presented in the book and how they're presented in the movies, that both are completely acceptable. You may want to say, well, it's not faithful. Tolkien originally had it this way. Peter Jackson, he interpreted the books. So he made the movies into his own thing, taking great inspiration. And you can find it, with characters like Gimli or, Aragorn even, where, Gimli in the movies is comic relief.
Yes.
He's kind of grumpy. He's kind of always making snide comments. His little tiff with Legolas all the time. That does exist, but in the books, he is a very noble character. He is very wise, and he takes things very seriously. So it's kind of like do that about face, make him just like, oh, he just likes to, get drunk and get tossed around and stuff like that.
Right.
It's kind of this or that, and I'll take both.
Okay.
Because
I can see how it would be a turnoff for some fans.
I absolutely, it would be, because it's almost, people can make the argument that it's disrespectful,
right?
Kind of degrading his character like that. But I see the value in a modern audience. I see the value of that his character is portrayed.
And I think too, what Peter Jackson did with someone like Gandalf and Aragorn is tried to make their characters more relatable. Because I think a lot of the characters in the book maybe came up with that sure-footed, like I know who I am, like I know what I want kind of thing. And then in the movies, he made like with Aragorn, it's like, oh, can I be, can I take this place as king?
Yes.
Do I have any right to with like my ancestors' past and everything?
Yeah. And specifically with Aragorn, because there are certain distinctions being that can be made with how he kind of proceeds with his action in response to what his destiny is.
Right.
He's the heir to the throne of Gondor. In the movie, he's kind of portrayed as this reluctant hero. Like, people are saying, you were born for this, and he's like, I don't want it, and all this kind of stuff. And in the book, it is along those lines, because he does make discerning actions where he's like, I'm not going to be king yet. You know, there are certain things he kind of has to go through, like that, his own little hero's journey in the literature. But, you know, for one defining detail of both the book and the movie is his sword. Because in the third movie, in the movies now, he gets his sword Anduril, which is the reforged Narsil, which is the famous blade that cut Sauron and defeated him. It's reforged and give it to him at the climax of the third movie. You know, this is when he accepts his destiny. Whereas in the books, it is reforged and he's held on to it, but it is reforged before the Fellowship actually takes out. So in the Fellowship of the book, in the books, he has the sword. So he already recognizes what his role is in the world. And, you know, there's that reluctant hero in both. But, you know, I think it's more pushed in the movies.
Right. And I agree with that. So as far as cons for The Lord of the Rings, what do you feel that they didn't do as well on?
You know, there are a few, I would say, kind of omissions and kind of like pacing with the story. For the most part, you know, it's not an issue throughout the whole movie. One of the biggest criticisms is how the movie ends. How the last movie ends. You know, it's, you know, people say like, oh, I thought it ended, but then, you know, it just kept going, and then I thought it ended. So, you know, the famous 5 endings. It makes perfect sense, though, like from a plot perspective, that there do need to be these closing chapters of all these characters, because it's not just one person that, you know, happily ever after. It is a total ensemble. Everyone has to kind of get their kind of farewells, their epilogues. I would love to have even seen even more. Like, you know, Aragorn's crowned king, the hobbits return home, Frodo sails west with the elves and Gandalf. You know, that's kind of hitting all the major points of what the scenes were in the movies. But a lot more actually does happen that's explained in the books. And you know, that's a kind of a detractor, is I would have been happy with more endings. You know, there's a whole huge chapter omitted from the books into the movies. Are you
talking about the scorching of the Shire?
The scouring of the Shire. So when the hobbits come back, it's completely taken over. The Shire, Saruman wasn't killed off yet. He had come to the Shire and he had taken it over. And it's the hobbits and the lessons they've learned inspire the other hobbits to essentially rebel against him and to kind of overthrow him to reclaim the Shire for them. You know, that is, people consider that to be like the thematic climax of the story, even though it's almost at the very end. It's because it's, you know, the hobbits coming into their own, as opposed to just tagging along on the adventures of the other characters.
Right, because as you were explaining it, I was thinking that because just in general, they're meant to be, you know, like the peaceful creatures that don't seek out adventure. And then they're standing up for their home. You
know, because they have their moments throughout the whole story, but you know, it's kind of something that you're like reading and you're like, oh my, it's like a cheer-worthy moment as it's going on. And the fact that they omitted it, it's disappointing, but totally understood, because it would have just added another half hour to the movie, 45 minutes, if they wanted to do it justice. So
well, they never did add that, but there are extended cuts of The Lord of the Rings. Do you think that those extended cuts help it as an adaptation? Is it
100%. The only way to watch Lord of the Rings is the extended editions. You know, those movies could be 5 hours long each, and I would watch them.
Well, they almost were, I think, with the extended cuts.
Well, one of them was 4.5 hours. The last one. But, you know, just the theatrical release, they're fine. They're totally watchable movies, but I think it just adds so much more to the story to watch them extended. You just have to be dedicated to sit there and be okay watching a 4-hour movie.
And then I think we can both agree that just as movies on their own, even if they weren't adapting something, they're just awesome movies.
Oh, well, I think the record sets for itself, you know. Most Oscar sweeps and you know, the most tied for the most Oscar wins, and, you know, nominated for all of them and won in all categories for the Return of the King specifically. You know, the accolades are there, the fans there, the money is there, you know, everything that poured into it, it paid off. I think Peter Jackson, and I think the world recognized that Peter Jackson did a great job with the movies.
Absolutely. So let's kind of shift then to the fairly more recent adaptation of
The Hobbit, which I have read The Hobbit. It's been a while though. It was like I think senior year of high school was when I read it. Yeah, just how do you feel about those movies?
The Hobbit. So I went. Everyone always kind of pondered, would they make The Hobbit after Lord of the Rings? And sure enough, 10 years later, they did. It was mired. There's the stories about it mired in production hell.
Right.
However long it took for them to actually make it, going through directors until Peter Jackson actually did finally get the go-ahead to like step up and kind of reclaim it. And ultimately, to me, it became an ultimate failure. It made money. It was promoted and stuff. People have their likes about it, but I think in comparison-wise to Lord of the Rings, it is not that good.
I agree.
The first movie is pretty good.
Yeah, I enjoyed
that is a decent movie. It's pretty much once they get into the second and third that it just falls off a sharp cliff, in my opinion.
I like the first movie. I don't mind the second either, but yeah, the third one is where it lost me.
Yeah,
personally.
And it kind of boils down to that it's another 3 movies. You compare to Lord of the Rings, which is over 1,000 pages, and then The Hobbit, which isn't even 300 pages,
right? And
you're making another 3-film epic. And it doesn't make sense that it was 3 movies.
I mean, do you think there was anything behind that except corporate was like...
Oh, they wanted more money.
Yeah.
It's the symmetry kind of aspect. Like, well, we already have one trilogy. What are we going to make 2 movies? And that's what it was originally planned for, was 2 movies, which would have made perfect sense. But they were like, no, we need to stretch this out as much as we can.
I mean, do you think they could have made that, like, if they did the 3 movies but just made them shorter each? Like, would it have worked? I just don't know. I guess you need a good starting and stopping point.
You do, and the issue was making it 3 movies was extending it, each of the movies. And that was my issue with the second one, because you said it was all right. Most of the movie is fun. It's really the last... I would say 45 minutes that it kind of got dragged out, and it's all non-book related stuff.
Yeah.
It's all the stuff that they added that really isn't a part of the actual story of The Hobbit.
But I was going to say, though, from what I understand, they took some stuff from the, like, addendum.
The appendix. And that really kind of was put forth in, like, the last movie. Because that's, aside from the main characters of the Bilbo and the dwarves, you have Gandalf's essential story.
Right.
And what he was doing during The Hobbit. Because he disappears in the story, in the book. And this is kind of the opportunity that the movies took, just to tell what was going on with him and the elves and the necromancer and Dol Guldur and
who was actually Sauron. That well?
That actually, I think they did very well. It's kind of a lot of the other stuff that they just kind of dragged out. Smaug, it was great and menacing on screen, but I felt like he got way too much screen time for what is essentially 2 chapters in the book.
Right.
So, like I said, it just came out to drawing it out a little too much, that it could have been condensed more into 2 movies.
Yeah. And I agree. I think it probably would have been better as 2. Now, what did you like about it? What did you like about
What did I like about it? Honestly, it was a larger ensemble cast than Lord of the Rings, and I thought they actually did that pretty well. I even went to Comic-Con right before they had, it was come out, and they went to the panel and everything. And that was kind of one of the things discussed, was like if there was some kind of fear that, too much focus would be scattered because there's so many characters.
Yeah, that's difficult to do.
And, there is a lot of them are surface level, where it's just they kind of get a couple lines in and you kind of just get a simple stereotype kind of image of who they are. But I think they managed it well for, 14 people just like walking across a place. We know all their names and everything. So that was kind of the things that were done well. The most famous scene in The Hobbit, the Riddles in the Dark, bringing back Andy Serkis as Gollum and, having Martin Freeman's Bilbo kind of do the riddle challenge with him, I thought was an excellent, excellent scene. And, it really showcased the actor's chops. And it really brought an exact image of what I would picture in the book into life. That's not, so that's a kind of a flip side. is, some things I was like, oh yeah, this is exactly how I pictured in the book, or especially after seeing Lord of the Rings, and it's like, okay, yeah, this is exactly how I would see it translate. But then you have the complete opposite, because Lord of the Rings, they focus a lot on practical effects or even realistic kind of CGI, whereas The Hobbit, it was all green screen.
Yes, I think people were like, especially the third movie where we got into the Battle of the Five Armies, they were like, video game.
100% felt like that, like a video game cutscene, because most of the characters were just CGI. There's even a story of Ian McKellen, who played Gandalf, just being really depressed on set because it is literally just all the camera crew and such, and then him.
He's like, I'm not working off anything.
In front of a green screen, and half his scenes were done that way, and he felt very isolated and alone because he's not working with any actors in a lot of scenes.
Right.
So that's a production thing. That is a producer from Warner Brothers. That's New Line Cinema. That's all that. That's their fault. I don't blame Peter Jackson for that, because if they had the budget, if they had the go ahead, I know that Peter Jackson would have produced another realistic masterpiece like Lord of the Rings.
Yes, because I agree. I think production came into it like I'll just call them corporate. They came into it a lot, like with the addition of needing Legolas in there just to have a character that you recognize. Even though they had the beginning with Frodo and Bilbo, and that worked for me. I didn't have any problem with that, but then they were like, oh well, we need one more thing to connect it and have a familiar face. And I didn't think it was necessary.
And to even go even further, just shoehorning Legolas in, it makes sense that Legolas is present.
Yeah.
The fact that they made him so prevalent, though, as if he was just reprising his main character role, from The Lord of the Rings, is a little absurd. And the fact that they also incorporated it into a love triangle with an elf woman, him, and one of the dwarves, which would make zero sense in Tolkien's writings, where interracial relationships are literally, you can count them on one hand in the entirety of its history, where this is kind of just an absurd excuse, kind of just have a modern romance in it. And poor Evangeline Lilly, who played Toriel, who literally stipulates in her contracts that she will never be part of love triangles, and they tricked her and got her into another love triangle.
Yeah. And I mean, Toriel in general is obviously someone that they added in too. I assume it's just to have a woman in the cast. And, as a woman, I guess I can appreciate that, I like a powerful woman character in my stuff. But I almost think that adding the even just the romance in general, even if it wasn't a love triangle, that hurts the powerful woman character for me. So it's you're going to add a woman in and you're going to try and make her a powerful character, but then she also has to be in a love interest. But I guess, they kind of needed that to have it make sense. Why is she following them? Why does she care? But I feel like she could just care on the basis of her being a good human being and wanting to help her, people get their home back or something.
Yeah. That comes down to a writing issue, because it's a brand new character. It's not something that they have source material based on. If they had someone writing a script where, there could be a more in-universe plausible explanation of having Toriel involved in the story. The elves are there. They are present. They are after the dwarves. There's enmity between them. Having her just kind of this guy's kind of cute. This dwarf's kind of cute. Let me just make sure he's okay.
I just also thought the romance wasn't good. I guess if it was a good romance, it could have been fine,
it just wasn't believable.
Yeah.
It just wasn't believable between some elf who met some dwarf literally in a cell, and then all of a sudden she's in love with him because he gave her a stone.
Right.
And it's just a little
some cheesy lines,
star-crossed absurdity. Yeah, and it was very cheesy and very unrealistic, even in universe, where you compare it to Aragorn and Arwen's love story, which literally they definitely pumped up more in the movies than in the books. Right. It exists, but it's just kind of Arwen exists. She's kind of in love with Aragorn, and at the end she does show up and marry him because he saved the day. Whereas in the movie they kind of hash over their relationship and the struggle between a man and an elf, kind of working together. Yeah. Whereas they crammed all the stuff in The Hobbit in with half of a movie. So.
Right. And on the topic of characters that they kind of added in that were definitely mentioned in the book but did not have a big role, Azog. He's supposed to be dead.
Yeah. So they kind of played like the whole switcheroo stuff with a lot of, the orcs, Azog, the Defiler, he is the one that fought at the Battle of Moria in the flashback sequence where Thorin got his famous shield and all that stuff. But he does die, and so they just kind of played that he didn't die.
Right.
They wanted a bad guy, and it's easy just to carry someone over from the past.
Yeah. Do you think it worked?
I don't mind there being like kind of like a bad orc. My biggest issue was the fact that he was CGI.
Yeah.
That was my biggest issue. Like, in Lord of the Rings, they had orcs and Uruk-hai who were not CGI, just huge dudes with makeup and stuff. And
I mean, they should have done a mix at least.
I would have appreciated that. Just because it was like, kind of like I'm watching a video game. And that that it lowers that quality just a little and makes it less meaningful.
Because do you think the action is interesting then?
Some of it is.
Okay.
Some of it is like decent. It's anything that you would see in a movie. And then some of it's a little ridiculous because specifically there was one of the scenes with Legolas, and he's like grabbing onto like these bat creatures and flying down, and it's just like over, like I said, just levels of absurdity.
I guess that was somewhat reminiscent of him like doing the slightly ridiculous trick of like the skateboarding,
sliding down with the shield and stuff. But that was a practical thing.
It was a practical thing.
He literally got on a shield and slid down the stairs and did that. A lot of those CGI,
but it was almost like
kind
Super
of invented
Mario,
things.
him like bouncing on the
jumping, like literally running up a falling bridge. Listen, you got to. Maybe I wasn't the audience for this. Maybe it was for little kids who would be entertained by this. I don't know. But like I said, everything has their pros and cons to it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we both agree that overall that The Hobbit was not as successful.
Listen, I would just say it was not as successful as Lord of the Rings. It clearly was successful. Yeah. It clearly made money. It did whatever the corporate corporation set out to do. As fans, and it is divided. It is very divisive. Like there are fans who there are fans absolutely who enjoy it, and there are fans who are like, this is just an abomination, a cash grab kind of situation. And I'm myself split on that. Like because I like the first movie. I think that was a great movie, and then the others are. I agree with that latter opinion that it is kind of just a cash grab. But it's good. It exists. Right. It's there. Maybe in 20 something years it'll get redone. Who knows?
Not to put you on the spot, but if you have an opinion on this, let's say they did make it the two movies. How would you kind of split up? Like, what is there something specific that you would take out, or that you think they like spend?
That's pretty good. Because like looking at like where they cut off each movie is very interesting. The way the second movie ended with Smaug essentially coming towards Lake Town after confronting the dwarves and stuff, I thought that was actually a really, really, really good way to end it. But unfortunately, there's not much story left to tell after that because he attacks Lake Town, he gets killed, and then there's the battle. Literally just the battle. So like, artistically I could see like, that is a good point to cut off, but there would have to be more story kind of shoved into the latter half if they wanted to do that. So it's kind of going to be an issue with pacing because a lot of the stuff they added with Gandalf, I feel like could have been in the later movie.
Right.
So, you kind of, the first movie is just like the Bilbo and the dwarves and Gandalf leaving them as they start their journey. And then you have the second, and pretty much have it come up to maybe where they're captured by the elves, or if they do get all the way to the Lonely Mountain, where they actually do, there and back again is the original title of the story. So maybe the first movie is there, and then the second is back even though back is literally half a chapter. But I don't know. I'm not a screenwriter.
Well,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Well, those movies, they were about 2.5
Yeah, they
hours,
definitely
I
weren't
think.
as long. The last movie is the shortest.
Yeah.
I think it's just over 2 hours.
So maybe, I mean, with The Lord of the Rings, like, the fans of that franchise have no issue with sitting down for a long movie. So maybe if they did the 2, they should have just made it like 3.5 each.
Yeah, and they definitely could have done that, but
made it work. Yeah,
that's a corporate decision because shorter run times means more showings at theaters and more butts and seats. So that's 100% why that you don't really see a lot of movies that are 3 hours, almost 4 hours long anymore.
Curse you, corporations. So do you have any final thoughts that you want to say about it?
They're my favorite movies. They're my favorite books. If someone hasn't seen the movies, make a weekend of it. Sit down and watch them all, extended editions, not the theatrical cuts. The Hobbit is a take it or leave it. The Lord of the Rings is an essential. In terms of the books, though, I think both are essential. I think The Hobbit is very important. That's coming on like 90 years old.
Yeah.
That is, that's just the introduction into, the world of Lord of the Rings. It's even been retconned by Lord of the Rings, where they even reprinted it, changing aspects of the story, specifically the Riddles in the Dark story chapter. But I think they're both, at least, the Lord of the Rings is essential reading. The Hobbit for children, The Lord of the Rings for older teens and adults. Definitely because it's very dense.
Yeah, I'll get there. I promise.
I also recommend, if you're into audiobooks, absolutely do the audiobook. Andy Serkis recorded it, and he does the voices, and so
I do love Andy Serkis.
Yeah, so definitely I recommend that if it's hard to just sit there and open the book and read it yourself, have someone read it to you, and there's no one better than Andy Serkis.
And 2 final questions. Lord of the Rings movies, good adaptation, yes or no?
I think they're great adaptations. I think, for the most part, they even surpass a lot of aspects of the book. I would die on that hill.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And The Hobbit, good adaptation, yes or no?
What it adapted correctly, it was great. I'm trying to. No, I'm just gonna flat out say no. It wasn't a good adaptation.
All right.
Yeah, I'll just say no.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Robert.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this episode of Circulating Conversations. If you enjoyed this discussion and want to hear more, you can find past episodes of Circulating Conversations podcast on the Leesburg Library's YouTube channel. I hope you'll join us again on Circulating Conversations in the future.